So one of my bugbears is in movies or TV shows where you see the protagonists training with sharp swords. That's not to say that people didn't train with sharp swords some of the time. In fact, it's even mentioned in a few treatises. But it certainly doesn't seem to have been normal. Firstly for safety, but also because it wrecks your sharp sword. Now, of course, what historical fencers usually used in the period were things like this feder here, sometimes known as a federschwert, probably called a paratschwert, in fact, in period, but essentially a blunt, flexible, blunt-ended with a shield on it version of a longsword. They didn't use sharp longswords usually for practice. Later on in the 16th and 17th centuries, they made rapier and side sword versions of these with blunt nail tips, which sometimes had little padded ends added on to make those safe for fencing, or safer for fencing with as well. And an often overlooked but very important type of fencing weapon is known as the Dussack, and this is actually featured in a whole bunch of 16th century German treatises, and they're made of some kind of organic material. The reconstruction that you can see here, we'll talk about the Dussacks more in a future video, are made of leather and other materials inside, usually wood or rattan or other stiffeners, but these were a really good and, for the time, pretty safe practice weapon. But these days we have other things available to us. Hi folks, Matt Easton here, Schola Gladiatoria. So we have mentioned briefly Dussacks, and we're going to look at Dussacks again in a future video. But for now I want to look at a modern alternative to the Dussack, which is a really good training implement for beginners or experienced people who don't want to put all of their kit on for sparring with steel swords, because of course when we use steel swords like this we have to wear an awful lot of safety equipment, and unfortunately that can be expensive, but also it can be really hot. So if you live in a hot place, or you're just in a hot training hall, or it's the end of the session, this often applies to me, and you want to take your kit off but still want to have another bout, then we have some fantastic options from Fake Steel Armory. Now, regular viewers of this channel will know before I have looked at Fake Steel Armory, and as mentioned we have actually been using these for I think about a year now. We've got various models in use, from sabres and long swords through to arming swords and hangers, and some more, and I've got some new ones to show you here. So previously you have seen things like the 1796 light cavalry sabre, the English Wakefield type hanger, and the Viking period sword, which have all seen extensive use in the club. And I have to say, and I'm happy to say this, after months and months of use of hitting fencing masks and other bits of equipment and people, of course, they're in pretty much like pristine condition. They have stood up really well. Nothing has broken, nothing's come loose, nothing's got bent, none of the kind of foam or covering on it that's sort of part of the same material actually, it has got torn or scuffed or anything else. These have stood up absolutely fantastically well. And as well as enabling us to use certain types of weapon which we don't usually use in sparring, like this warhammer or indeed the axe that we have and so on and so forth, you can use mismatched weapons and they're really fun to use. In addition to that, they are also really popular both with our beginners, because it enables them to get into sparring early on with less protective equipment, but also with our more experienced members, because they can spar with the beginners who don't have so much equipment, and indeed we can have a bash with each other, have a lot of fun. And if you live in areas where, unfortunately, like the UK, it's not socially acceptable most of the time to take steel swords to the park anymore because of stupid laws and everything else, these, however, although they look fairly realistic, are of course completely legal and safe to take around. So out of the new batch that have been sent to us by Fake Steel Armory, link below obviously, one of my favourites is the Gladius. We actually have two of these Gladii, and these are fantastic. Now I do actually have some Roman Scutum, which you'll know they've featured in the channel quite a lot, and we have formerly used fairly short sticks for sparring with these. But these are actually way safer, and they do exactly the same job. Now, with a big shield and a short sword like this, there isn't an enormous amount of blade-on-blade contact, although there's perhaps more than you might think. But you can use these as single weapons. You can use them like a Dimachorus Gladiator, one in each hand, which I have done. And these are really fun to use, and they give you a real insight into fighting with a short sword like this. And of course, if you're fighting against longer weapons, particularly longer swords actually, which have a much bigger reach, then you'll notice the big disadvantage of just having something like a Gladius. They are really supposed to be used with shields, but they can be used by themselves. And these have stood up absolutely fantastically well. I mean, look at the thing. It looks like a real Gladius. They're really cool. Even the little detail on the end there. So cool. Now, one of the other models which has proven to be very popular in club, including with myself, is a messer, a lang messer. Now, we had, as you saw, the Wakefield type hanger before, which is a bit like a short saber really, but this is a true German style messer. It looks like exactly like something out of Talhofer or something like that. And you'll notice you've got the elongated grip with the long pommel, which you can use for hooking. You have the nagel on the side there, and of course it's completely safe to hit yourself with. Now, we do wear fencing masks when we use these because we like to go for face thrusts and head hits safely. You can use these without a mask, but obviously you have to be very careful of faces because they can hit pretty hard. These are not exactly like what most people will be used to from a LARP sword. They do hit harder and they are heavier. Okay, so while these are lighter than the steel swords, they are heavier than a typical LARP sword. They're balanced, they have metal inside here to balance them, so they move more like an actual sword. They move really quickly, but of course they're way safer to use than a typical steel or even wooden weapon. Anyway, the messer here, pretty typical shape for a German messer, works absolutely fantastically and is really fun to practice messer techniques with, and of course to get into sparring. Now, for those of you who want to be a knight rather than a peasant or a common townsperson, we of course have an arming sword here. Now, obviously these were used by all sorts of people. This works really well with a buckler. If you've got a plastic buckler, even a steel buckler, these have been used with, and they've stood up really well. Again, no damage to the tips, despite the fact that we repeatedly use these for thrusting. You have to be a little bit careful with thrusting, and in fact fake steel don't mandate thrusting with these weapons. They can't guarantee safety both for the weapons and the person, but we do thrust with them a lot and no damage has come to the weapons. However, they can hit quite hard, so you need to be a bit careful with the thrusts, because while these do flex, they don't actually flex as much as a flexible steel sword. So you've got to be a bit careful with the thrusts, but the cuts are obviously way safer and there's no rough bird edges or anything like that. So a fairly standard, typical kind of arming sword, could be used with a buckler, could be used with a large shield, or just used by itself. And of course this is very compatible with the Langmesser we just looked at. And in fact, just a little bit of critical feedback here. So we previously had this arming sword from Fake Steel, now we've got this one. Now, completely candidly, they've basically got the same blade on them, but completely candidly, I much prefer the look of the golden fishtail pommel there. Looks absolutely gorgeous. But functionally, this is actually nicer to use. Why? Well, surprisingly, because the fancy grip here I find a little bit slim and a little bit prone to rotating in the hand, and pretty much everyone in the club has noticed that. So I would recommend in time that these grips be made a little bit wider but still kept flat for better indexing. In contrast, this more basic model of arming sword actually has an oval section grip which actually aligns in the hand perfectly. So functionally, although this is less fancy, I actually find this one better. Now, one of the other great things about having a foam weapon head is that you can put them on a long stick. So we've actually got here a Fake Steel halberd head. Now, I haven't fitted this very professionally. I've put it on a rattan shaft. Rattan is good, if I just demonstrate, because it has flex in it, so it takes some of the force of the blow out and obviously makes thrusts a little bit safer. Also, rattan's incredibly durable. We've never had one of these rattan shafts break, whereas we've had lots of ash shafts break. This has just been taped on with some gaffer tape, so it slides into the socket. You can attach it how you like. I'm sure you can do it in a more pretty way, but that's a quick and easy way. Here is the, this is actually a slightly different version of halberd head. They've sent us two different designs of head, very nice. Both kind of Swiss German style halberds. And as you can see there, we've got a round socket. You put your shaft in there and then you can secure it however you like. You could potentially glue it. We've just used tape because for training purposes that works fine. And this makes for an incredibly safe thrusting point without any need for any further protection than a fencing mask and some gloves. And of course, you can chop with these things. Now, I have to fully admit that this is lighter than a real halberd. That being said, halberds are lighter than a lot of people think. Pole axes tend to be around 5 pounds in weight. Halberds are sometimes lighter than that. Sometimes they're heavier, but sometimes they're lighter, so 4 pounds, something like that. So actually, in terms of the movement, they're a little bit quicker than the real thing, but not a huge amount, because remember that with a long shaft, you have your hands far apart, so even if the head's heavier, still moves pretty quickly anyway. So this offers us a really safe way to have sparring between, for example, sword and halberd, which I've tried myself and it's great fun. You can use them for spear heads, and you can get other types of polearm heads as well. So a safer way of sparring with polearms in a HEMA context. And finally, no sword collection would be complete without a katana. That's right. Now, I've actually showed this to some people who train with us and who visited us, including kendoka and iaido practitioners and kenjutsu, and they really liked these. And now we do actually have some steel sparring katanas in the club from various makers, but again, these offer us the opportunity to do longsword versus katana or saber versus katana in a really quick, fun, easy kind of way. Now, I should also mention this is the slightly lighter, more flexible type of core. So the fake steel offer two types: the slightly heavier version, the kind of HEMA version, and then the lighter LARP version. To be honest, we've got both and they've both been really good. So I think you take your pick. Overall, I'd say the lighter ones are a little bit safer to use. The heavier ones feel a bit more like a real sword, but they both handle really, really well. So having a katana that we can spar with has been a lot of fun. Got to be honest, all of your preconceptions about katanas based on my videos and other people who run channels are true. Having a short blade with a long grip means that usually you're outranged by people with even a long arming sword or a long sword, and indeed not having a crossguard or much hand protection means you get hit in the hands a lot. But that in itself is interesting, so it's a challenge to use a sword like this because it's relatively short with a relatively small crossguard. But one of the things that katanas are famous for is their speed of draw through iaido techniques. And we have a fancy version here which even has real Samigawa and Ito wrap. It's insane. It looks like a real katana, and it's in a saya or scabbard, so you can wear this. I mean, you could wear this for like LARP or cosplay if you wanted, but for training purposes this is great because you can actually practice from the scabbarded sword and unsheathing it and doing techniques from there. So it means that you've got a safe sparring katana and a scabbard or saya for it to go into. I mean, look at this thing. It's incredible. I mean, you can tell it's not real when you see the blade, but the hilt is basically like, it's like a real hilt of a real katana. The tsuba even has a cool little fish design on it down there. Anyway, really, really cool. So thanks once again to Fake Steel for sending these through for my club to use, basically for me to share with you here. Check out the link below down to Fake Steel, and also watch out in future weeks or months for some news about a potential collaboration between me and Fake Steel Armory. A new product maybe? Let's see. Anyway, I have been Matt Easton, I'll continue to be, and I hope I'll see you back on the channel really soon. Cheers folks! Thanks for watching. We've got extra videos on Patreon. Please give our Facebook a like and subscribe if you haven't already. Cheers folks!